All right, thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Vernon Wall, and my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm currently the Director of Business Development for LeaderShape, and we're excited to have you join us for our 6th series of virtual conversations that we are providing for leadership educators. We've had over 2,100 people register and engage in our first five series, actually, and we're excited to be back for round 6. The purpose of our time together is really to share questions, thoughts, and best practices as we continue to reimagine how we deliver engaging leadership programs to students through virtual platforms. I know that many of you have maybe been on a Zoom presentation before, but we'd love to share with you our next slide, which really just shares you a little bit about the platform, the way we're going to use the platform. And that is that we'd love for you to post your comments and questions in the chat area. What's been so amazing about this experience that we've had so far is that we really love for the chat box to be robust in terms of not only questions and comments to our guest facilitator, but also to talk to each other and to share thoughts and reflections. And I'm gonna be here to assist our facilitator in monitoring the chat because I know it can be difficult sometimes for folks to catch up. So this is more of a video podcast than anything else and a conversation between us two. We'll have some polls that we'll be showing that we'd love for you to participate in. And also, too, if you have a question, you can definitely put it in the chat, or you can send it to me privately, and we'll take care of that. And we'd love, since we only have a limited amount of time, we've asked folks if they could just remain muted and use the chat so that we can continue to engage. And yeah, I am so excited to have my good friend and colleague Bernie join us today. And I'm just going to turn it over to him to have him introduce himself and tell you a little bit about him, and we'll get started. Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, Vernon. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you. We're going to get started. Oh, Vernon, did you want to cover this piece before we get started?
Oh, yeah. We are LeaderShape. And for those of you who do not know about us, we are a not-for-profit, and our vision is to actually think about what would the world look like if everyone led with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And so we're just excited to join you and engage you because this is all about who we are in terms of our mission. So yeah, thanks, Bernie. And Bernie's a part of our LeaderShape community, as all of our facilitators have been through this. And so we're just excited that you're here with us.
Well, hi, everyone. This is me. My name is Bernie Liang. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm coming to you here from Seattle. Here's what we're going to be doing today and talking a little bit more about reluctant leadership. And I myself am a reluctant leader. So I'll be speaking a little bit about my own experience, diving a little deeper into what reluctant leadership is, but I would love to hear any of your questions or commiserate with folks who are out there. So before we get too far, I just want to acknowledge the land that we're on. And so I'm just going to read this out loud to you all. And this is the land acknowledgement from my institution. So if you want to just take a moment to ground yourself, that would be helpful. As we begin our gathering, I and we respectfully acknowledge that our event today is taking place on occupied Native, Aboriginal, and Indigenous land, and that Seattle is on the homelands of the Duwamish people. I pay respect to elders past and present, and extend that respect to their descendants and to all Indigenous people. To acknowledge this land in the United States is to recognize its longer history and our place in that history. It is to recognize these lands and waters and their significance for the peoples who lived and continue to live in our country, whose practices and spiritualities were and are tied to the land and the water, and whose lives continue to enrich and develop in relationship to the land, waters, and other inhabitants today. Thank you. So for folks who are here, feel free to share your name, pronouns, and your location. And if you know what the Indigenous lands that you're coming from, would love to know that and to see those. And so I'll just take a moment for you to do that. Thanks, Chris. Hello, Colby. It was nice to see you join us today. So take a couple more moments to share in the chat as you feel comfortable, and I will get started. All right, so the first question, I'm just going to launch this poll here, is who's out there around reluctant leadership? Who are we? How do you identify? Are you here to learn more about reluctant leadership? Are you yourself a reluctant leader? Are you here? Do you have a reluctant leader that you're working with that you would like more information about? Would love to know who's in the audience today so I can best cover the information that you need. Awesome. All right, it looks like a lot of folks are here to learn more about what a reluctant leader is. Some folks who are identifying as a reluctant leader, supporting reluctant leaders. So, and that last poll question about being sent by someone is a little bit of a joke, but sometimes that's what we as reluctant leaders need, is someone. We'll get into that a little bit too. All right, I'm going to end the polling here. And here are the results. So folks are here to learn more about reluctant leadership. And I can tell you that for me, it took me a while to really find out what this is for me. It wasn't something that I knew a lot about. I don't think it's something that we talk a lot about. But when I found the definition and I looked into it a little bit more, I found that that was really the best way that I can describe how I identified as a leader and my experience in leadership. All right. So here's a little bit more about me. Again, my name is Bernie Liang. I come from New Jersey originally, and my parents were immigrants to this country. And so my experience in this country is really very much as a first generation American. I don't speak any of the languages of my family, and yet I feel deeply ingrained in the Asian American experience, with my father being originally from China and my mother being originally from the Philippines. So culturally, I grew up in this place that was very much dissonant. In my Asian American cultures, sticking out or making a big fuss, and all these like leadership tropes that we talk about, being extroverted and being in front of people and leading, and all these things that we talk about when we talk about leadership, were very much countercultural to the ways that my parents raised me. I remember very vividly sitting down with them at one point and being very angry about something that had happened at school, whether it was bullying or teachers' experiences or all the things that happen in elementary school. And my parents both sitting me down to say, don't rock the boat. And in a lot of ways, leadership for me is about rocking the boat. It's about trying to create a vision and trying to move things forward. And so here I was, 5th, 6th grade, I think is when this conversation happened, already feeling this dissonance of being both American and Asian, but also hearing these messages culturally about not sticking out and just kind of keeping your head down and working hard, right? That was a big message for me. It was about working hard. And for me, I took that to heart. It really became part of who I am, that sticking out was not something that was going to be helpful to me or to my family, right? In the Asian American culture, you are a representative, and especially with immigrant parents, you are this representative of your family. So as I was growing up, I didn't really pursue a lot of opportunities for leadership, whether that was, in our student government or in clubs or anything like that, because I just didn't know about it. And as a first generation college student, it was really hard for me to know how to navigate this educational system that my family didn't know anything about. So very much my older sister became sort of the way maker for me to understand what was going on. So my experience in college, my college search also became very much that. When I ended up looking for colleges, I ended up saying, well, I want to stay home, and I ended up going to Penn State, which is a huge 4 hours away from where I grew up. And when I was there, I really felt this dissonance that I didn't have the community that I was used to. I didn't have my family that I was used to. And yet I felt this pull to be involved in something or to find that community. So one of the most embarrassing things that's ever happened to me in college was my mother called Penn State because she knew that I was not very happy there in my first semester. And she called the main line and said, I need to talk to a Filipino person at Penn State. And they said, at that time, there weren't a lot of Filipino people working at Penn State. And so they ended up finding Dr. Paring McDonald, who was a Filipino woman who worked in the Multicultural Resource Center. And my mom got connected to her. And I received this phone call on there's this thing that we used to have, they were called answering machines. This is before we had cell phones. And so on my answering machine in front of my roommate, I got this phone call to say, your mother called me. I'm Filipina. She wanted you to talk to me because she thinks that you're depressed and that you're not having a good experience. Please call me. I'm happy to meet with you, blah, 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 blah. So this woman sort of led me through into the community that I became very engaged with, which was the Penn State Filipino Association. She was the advisor for this group. And I found my group, I found my people. Now, as a reluctant leader, I was also very okay being in the background and just being a member of PSFA, and then eventually, the choir and dance marathon and all the things that I got involved with. I was very, very much like, I'm good. Like, I can just come to the meetings and make friends and be fine. But what happened was when I found these communities, I found that people were asking me to be a leader. Why don't you go and speak on behalf of our club to this other club? Or come with us to this meeting to meet with the college administration to talk about how they're not supporting Asian Americans on campus. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And I knew that it was something that was important. And I was really, into the work. But it wasn't something that I was particularly comfortable with. Like I said, the meditation was, who, me? Like, why me? And people saw something in me very early on, even as I was growing up in high school. They saw the leadership in me before I saw the leadership in myself. So it led me to really think about, how important it was for me to have this community and to be not only to feel trust with them, but to feel their trust in me in order for me to feel comfortable enough to say, I can be a leader, I can do this, I can represent our group, or I can show up. So eventually I fell into student affairs, which I feel like is not a very unique story in student affairs. I had a great mentor. Her name is Sharon Mortensen. And she sat me down. She was in our leadership center at Penn State. And she said, what are you doing with your life? And I said, I don't know. I got this business degree. I don't really want to do that, but I don't know what else is out there. And Sharon said to me, do this. And I said, what is it exactly that you do, right? I think as student affairs folks, we often have these conversations with our students, like, what do? You seem like you really like what you do. And so she sat me down in her office. I still remember where it is. It's not there anymore because they've renovated the hub, but I still remember exactly. It was one of those times that felt like a very big moment. Like I was coming into this like realization of like, this is what you can do with your life. And she said, you can be me. You can do what I do. And I think that you can do, I think you can do this better than I can. And she was this older, like Italian American woman. I grew up in New Jersey, in North New Jersey. So I was very used to like Italian American culture. And I remember her saying like, you can do this and you can do this better than me. And I said, no, I can't. I look up to you. I think you're amazing. And she said, I believe in you. I think that you can do this. And she said, but you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. You're going to have to figure out when it is that you can feel like you can step into the circle. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but I really, I hold her in one of the revered places in my heart, because I think she really saw something in me that was a lot different than the way that I saw myself. So from there, I went into student affairs. I moved across the country to Seattle to go to Seattle University for graduate school. And I remember in graduate school, I feeling just this release, like, oh, I finally just get to do all the things that I want to do and want to get to study. And I studied like Native American ideas of education, and I read a lot by the Dalai Lama. I mean, I was kind of all over the place, but I was free to explore all these things in a different way than my business degree really allowed me to. So I remember being in class, and my faculty member at the time said, what do you want to do in student affairs? You need to pick a lane and you need to go for it. And then you're going to be, you have to figure out like how you want to jump. Our field is very much so that you have to jump from school to school in order to move up. That's our culture, right? Problematic as it might be, that's the way that it is. So he said, you're in housing now. What do you want to do? Do you want to be the director of housing? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, do you want to go into multicultural affairs? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't think it really matters where I end up. The most important thing for me is that I'm doing something around inclusion. At the time, we called it multicultural affairs and diversity. So it was diversity and leadership. That was the sweet spot for me. If I was doing that, I knew that I was doing something that meant something to me. And that this idea of moving up or moving around or being the director wasn't really in my sights. Now, again, I think that has a little bit to do with my culture and the way that I grew up. It might have to do with my own ideas of like self, but I also was like, that the title is not important to me. The work is important to me. And we'll learn a little bit later that reluctant leaders feel that way about the work. Like it's really just about the work. And that's why these ideas of leadership or leading others is not really how we think about it. So I'm sitting here with Vernon Wall, who's a friend of mine. We've known each other for many years, and I'm also coming off of being ACPA convention chair. For those of you who don't know, ACPA is an international organization of college educators, particularly in student affairs. I've been part of these convention teams for many years, and I've been in about 5 or 6 years ago, I was encouraged to think about being a convention chair. And at the time I said, I don't know what you mean. Like, I don't think I can do that. And actually my journey into LeaderShape was very much the same, to be a co-lead in LeaderShape. I just felt like that's not me. I couldn't stand and instruct, students how to do this. So with ACPA, I said, I'll think about it, which is my best way of saying, like, leave me alone. I'm going to think about it. And let me tell you, I was really great thinking about it. Like, what would that look like? How would it feel? I don't know. Look, I'm sure they'll find someone better for the job. I'm pretty sure, whatever. But it was Vernon who called and said, I want you to think about it. I know that this isn't something that you would just jump into, so I want to give you time. And I think he gave me about a month or so before, like even the month or two before the application came out, which was really smart of him. He obviously knows how to work with reluctant leaders. So I said, no, 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 maybe, maybe, maybe. And then sure, I'll throw my hat in. I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to do this, and I'm sure it's not going to be me. So lo and behold, it was me. And we just came off of a really great convention experience. And really, it was something that I would never give up, even though it was really difficult. We were supposed to be in person. It changed to a virtual event. You know, we had a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of drama that happens behind the convention planning. And but I think what was important for me is that that I did a lot of check-ins. Like, am I doing what I'm supposed to do? I did a lot of thinking. I had a lot of space, and I gave myself a lot of space to do the work in a way that meant meaningful to me. And I centered the community. I really wanted to center the people that we were serving, and particularly folks from minoritized backgrounds. That was such a big deal to me. And because that is so core to my experience as a leader, I really wanted to make sure that I was staying true and to that community. And I came through that community in ACPA too. So these are a few examples of how leadership has shown up to me. It's been a lot of people telling me that they see it in me way before I see it in myself. And even to this day, I rely on other folks to really tell me and to be the barometer to how I show up and what I bring to the table and how I bring it to the table. What people have told me and what I've started to believe in myself is the skills that I bring, the way that I can consolidate, the listening that I bring to a table, and inviting people in, the way that I think about the work that we do, and you know, I just had my annual review here in my role. I've been in the director for the Center for Student Involvement at SU for 10 years now here at CLU. And I'm always expecting that my annual evaluation is going to be like horrible, not showing up enough, not doing enough, all these things, right? Which would just, you know, kill me. But they always turn out to be these like really really sort of lavish shows of gratitude for the ways that I show up. And even then I'm still like, are you sure? Like, am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? So all of that to say is that when Vernon asked me to present, the first thing that I blurted out was, I think I should do it on reluctant leadership. Like, I think he said, will you do one? And I said, are you sure? Which seems to be a really great way for reluctant leaders to do like a check-in. So I'm going to ask you the second poll. And this, if you don't identify as a reluctant leader, maybe there are folks that are out there that you're supporting that, you know, think about the people that you're supporting and maybe what causes them to be reluctant leaders. So I'll just give you a moment. What causes you to be a reluctant leader? You yourself or the people that you support? Yeah, I don't think others see me as a leader. That's a big one. There's someone better for the job than me. Feel that a lot. I don't want our team to fail. I don't want to fail, and I don't want my team to fail. Personal or societal messages that I am not a leader. I am a bad leader and don't know it yet. If you don't know us, I always put the ones that are like funny, ironically funny at the end. But yeah. All right, see that almost everyone has participated. So it looks like the most popular answer is there's someone better for the job than I am. And that, let me tell you, is I'll show you the results here. that is a big one when we talk about this reluctant leadership, right? Um, someone better out there, right? I think this comes from some of the messages that we get about being leaders, right? Like maybe there's, you know, if we think about who the model of leadership is, we say, hey, you know, there's got to be someone else better. It's probably a white male who is, you know, better spoken, better read, with a degree that's higher than mine, whatever it might be. But here are some examples that I pulled from a website that I found. If you do a Google search, turns out there's a lot out there about reluctant leadership. But there are these folks that are out there that have made these extraordinary changes and updates and innovations in the fields that they're in. And they're saying, you know, I didn't want to be here. I didn't expect that I was going to be here. This second one, I used to think that you needed to be an extrovert to move up and to be successful. And I think making that presumption was a bit disheartening when you're younger, because you sort of thought, well, how am I ever going to achieve this where I have to be something that I'm not? So resonant to me, like so resonates with me, that there's this other person out there that can do better, and that I can't possibly do this because, and then therefore I'm resolved to be sort of where I am. So here's some characteristics of a reluctant leader that I pulled together from a couple of different sources. So one, that we're reluctant and skeptical. We're either reluctant and skeptical of the process or of ourselves. And in these days, I think about, you know, the generation that's just coming up, very reluctant about leadership in general, right? They're coming to higher education being skeptical of higher education and the education that they are receiving. So this idea of leadership, I know that when we talk about leadership in our office, we say students see this as a 4-letter word. They just want to stay, it's a dirty word on our campus. They just don't want anything to do with it. And yet we're out here in the streets saying, but you are a leader. They're self-motivated, passionate, conscientious, and can be selfless. We love to do the work, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But like in my story, what I was so passionate about was the community work that I was doing, and the connection to community, and how to elevate my community. And it started as Asian Americans, but it soon became about other communities, like our Black community, our Native community, our multiracial community, our trans community, our transracial adoptees. It just blossomed into all these other places. And sure, that's very overwhelming when we think about the number of people that is and how individualized we are in that. But I was so passionate about it that it became easier for me to say, but I'm speaking on behalf of this community that I am just so passionate about. Putting community above self, the desire to serve the greater good, like I just said, usually doing quality work. We are usually those folks that are just, you know, nose down, like doing stuff and just pumping great stuff out. And that's usually where, in my experience, that's usually where I get to be noticed, is like, oh, wow, you did this great thing. Do you want to do more? Do you want to do it on a bigger scale? Like where do you want to go with this? How do you think you want to blossom? And most of the time I say, I just wanted to do the job. I just wanted to do the work. We have an ability to be autonomous, right? We're able to do the work without a whole lot of, in some ways, a lot of guidance, right? Sometimes it's great for us to be able to say, here, go and think about this. How are you going to make this work? And that creative space, especially for me, I love being creative. I love having like new ideas and being all over the place. And I have this reality that I can also bring to a project that I think has been really great. And that I think, because I've been able to have the space to think about it, has been really beneficial, I think, in a lot of teams. Very concerned about others' perspectives about us. And so that question is, am I doing the work the right way? What if I'm a bad leader and I don't know it yet? Is very indicative of a reluctant leader. and worried about being blamed for collective failure. This is where some of the questions came from in this last poll, right? What if it fails? What if I fail? And what if I fail this team and this community? A big part of it. And it's a lot of the reasons why we love being nose down and just paying attention to this little cog in a wheel. The bigger it gets, the more responsibility we feel. So I don't know if this is resonating with folks. I don't know if you all are feeling this or not, but I'm just, hopefully it's helpful. So here's some examples of reluctant leaders. And of course, Michelle Obama is on here because she never wanted Barack Obama to be the president of the United States. When he asked her, she said no. And when he asked her again, then she said, okay, sure. Which is, I think, one of the best examples of reluctant leadership, right? And look at Michelle Obama. Like, she is the best example of, one of the best examples of leadership that I think our country has ever seen, right? And when she's asked, when are you going to run for president? She's always like, that's not what I'm about, right? We're steadfast in what we know. We're steadfast in our passion. And she is, I think, one of the shining beacons of reluctant leadership that's out there. The Dalai Lama also, right? The Dalai Lama was chosen at a very young age to be the leader of an entire religion. And I think he was 2 or 3 years old when he chose the object that would make him the Dalai Lama. What propelled him was his being kicked out of China. And suddenly he became this worldwide leader and had to speak on all these things. And the thing that he is the most committed to is Tibetan Buddhism. And when you hear him talk, and he will talk for hours, if you've ever heard, he will speak for hours. But the base of what he's talking about isn't my leadership, it is my religion. It's what I believe. Malala, of course, never asked to be shot in the face, right? But she believed in education for girls and has become such a central part of who she is. And I would argue has always been part of who she is, right? The reason why she was sought out and that violence was brought upon her was because of who she was, right? But she wasn't out there in the streets saying all this stuff. She is now, right? More so. But she was never that person that said, I am going to, be this quote unquote mountaintop leader. I had to throw in one for my Star Wars folks. Luke Skywalker never asked to be a leader. He just fell into it. But really what he believed in was, there's something better out there. And I'm searching for my family. That's what was in the core of Luke's story. He found his father. It wasn't the best case scenario, but it turned out to be okay. And no spoilers there, but hopefully there are no spoilers there. Brene Brown is a researcher. When she starts her talk, she says, I'm a researcher. I'm not this person like, I'm just trying to find community. I'm trying to find the people who are like me, for who this resonates with. And then, of course, Trayvon Martin's mother, who I've had the pleasure of meeting in person. And she was propelled into this work as well around Black lives. And if you've heard her speak, it really has been about voice. It's been about bringing voice and visibility to the violence happening to our Black community. That's what it's about. Of course, it's about her family. Of course, it's about the love. And she's been propelled into this national spotlight and didn't ask for that. That's not what her life was supposed to be about. And yet here she is doing this work for us to really understand this, and many of the other mothers in the Black Lives Matter movement and beyond. So I wanted to give you a few examples of the people that I think of, that the people that I look up to. There are lots more here. So that brings us to our third question here. And it is, so for those of you who are reluctant leaders, how would you best like to be supported as a reluctant leader? Or how would you like to best support your reluctant leaders out there? So you need reassurance, you need clear guidelines, or people need clear guidelines, or reluctant leaders need clear guidelines. Opportunities to check in with someone. The bigger picture. I want to make sure that others are having a good experience with my leadership, right? Check-ins. I want to make sure that our group is acknowledged for our work in progress. That one's not as funny, but it's important. All right, it looks like clear guidelines, the bigger picture, reassurance, all of these things, right? Yeah. I'm just doing a quick time check because I want to make sure that we can get through the rest of this. So I'm going to end this poll. And it looked like clear guidelines and parameters is a big piece, but all of these things, as you will learn now, are how you support reluctant leaders. So as a reluctant leader, I know a reluctant leader right off the bat. I know exactly who that person is. They're the person who's just like kicking butt, but is like just like head down. And those are the people that I know my people. And so I will find a student, I'm like, you know, how are you thinking about leadership? How are you doing this stuff? And they'll say, no. So here are the ways that I've learned, and also from this article that I found, 8 tips for encouraging a reluctant leader. So letting them know that mistakes are normal. Some of the biggest things that will crumble me as a leader are always, you did that wrong. And so the reassurance that I would need, right? And I've learned through the years to learn how to do that without feeling like, right? Because we also can't portray these like dominant ideas of like, you can't be wrong, you can't do all this stuff, right? Like, again, it's mountaintop leadership. So, so important for reluctant leaders to say, the whole reason why I don't want to step into this is because I don't want to be held responsible, and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to do all this stuff. So reassurance for sure. They do not need to have all of the answers. And that working in the team is really a value for reluctant leaders. Encouraging them to remind themselves of why, right? The purpose. Why are we doing this work? In my role as ACPA convention chair, Vernon knows this, other folks who work at ACPA know this, other of my friends know this. I ask this question all the time. Why am I doing this, right? In my most exasperated places, I will get to, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of this? And it's because I need to be reminded. I need to revisit, like, is this important? Is this gonna make a difference? Give them the basic tools to get started, right? So what are the parameters? Where do we need to go with this? And then let them go. They usually are the ones who know a lot about a lot of things, and we'll get things working. Let them know that it'll get easier, probably, hopefully. I know that my role, by the time I got to convention, I was like, I have literally felt like I've done everything that I could do to make this convention as good as it can be. And now it's just going to happen. But it took me a year and a half to get there. So let them know that you're behind them, that you trust them and they can trust you, and ensure them that their reluctance to lead is a strength of theirs. Right? The reluctance is a strength, that we're not just going to jump forward and like carry that flag and do that, because we really want to make sure that we can do the work right, and that our reluctance, our ability to step back, listen, pay attention, will bring a value. So,
Bernie, I'm so glad that you have that last one. I just want to say that is key, is that I think sometimes we enter this conversation with reluctant leaders are at a deficit. And what I love about that is saying that, no, it's a strength. And I join you. I'm the type of person that I know that in my career with students, I did look for reluctant leaders. And a quick story, I had a student, this just happened this year during the pandemic, a student who was my Residence Hall Association treasurer for a year. And I encouraged him to run for president. And he ran and he won. And he called me, because he has two kids now, and they're in college. And all he said was, "What did you see in me?" Because I did not want to be RHA president. He said, I'm a numbers guy. I love, working with budgets. He's an accountant and he now has his own business. He said, I did not want to be RHA president until you asked me. And it was when you asked me, and then he said, well, what? And he said, I'm reflecting on it now, Vernon, why? And I said, because I knew that you could do the job and I knew you had it in you. And so to hear stories like that is always just wonderful.
Yeah. Very gracious in that. And I know that I have said to Vernon so many times, like, thank you for this experience and thank you for this opportunity. And including today, like I would not have signed up to do this, to do these talks with LeaderShape, but feel so grateful that I can do it in a way that feels authentic to me. So why support reluctant leaders? Obviously, we've talked a lot about this throughout this presentation today, but here are a couple of additional reasons. They step into leadership roles for a bigger purpose, right? We're going to be community minded. We're going to think about the bigger picture, and we're not going to think about ourselves in that. We're not going to be like, this is going to bring me, like I was saying earlier with my graduate school experience, this is not, I don't do this because I want to be a VP or because I'm searching for a leadership role or a title. I'm doing it because it's important. They don't develop a sense of entitlement or self-importance. They develop their own style of leadership. So again, my style of leadership, I think, is not going to be the ones that that you see everywhere. It's going to be a lot more subdued. I also want to acknowledge that Laura in the chat, I think very, very much so. The reason why we're so reluctant is because we've seen bad examples of leadership in our experience. And we say, man, that person really messed it up. If they did that, I am going to mess it up that bad or worse, right? But we take the lessons, right? We take the lessons of what worked and what didn't work. When people say, what makes you a great supervisor, right? Like I get this a lot because we supervise graduate students through our program here. And I say, the biggest lessons I learned about being a bad supervisor or a good supervisor was from horrible supervisors, horrible. And I said, there wasn't anything, there were pieces of them that were great, and there were pieces of them that I just could never do. It would just be against everything in my being. And so one, I don't think of myself as a great supervisor. I'm always a work in progress. But when I think about, when people say, oh, you're a great supervisor to me, you've been so supportive, it's because of the bad examples that I've had in my life. They're committed to their own development to that point, and they look for opportunities to develop others. Like I said, I know a reluctant leader because I am one. But I am also an optimist. I also see the good in people, and my life's work, I think, is about engaging others. That is where I find that I'm the most myself, is when I'm having great conversations with people about what they think they can do and how I can be a guide in their life with them. So, okay, I've talked a lot about myself for the last almost an hour, but so here's some action steps. If you're a reluctant leader like me, take time to think about your own needs. Take time to think about, what is it that I want? We are very, very good at thinking about others, and culturally too, right? Like in my Asian, and particularly in my Filipino background, taking care of others is just like interwoven into my entire being. And so thinking about myself is really work. It's work, mental work and emotional work. Seek out mentors and others who can help bolster you. Some of those folks are on this call, so thanks for being here, continuing to support me. And then take small steps in leadership roles. Think about what would be a comfortable place for you to take a step forward. And for me, that was just, working through the ranks of higher education, or working in experiences through ACPA, or any of the other things that I've done in my life. But things that feel comfortable enough for me to take that on and to know that I'm not going to mess it up. So that's what I have today. hopefully things resonated with folks out there. But I'm always happy to talk with folks about this. I'm always happy to engage with folks. So please feel free to contact me if you're out there and you want to talk more about this. But at this point, happy to answer questions, happy to hear your reflections or anything. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, feel free, folks, to put some things in the chat, any reflections or thoughts. One of the things that I'm thinking about, Bernie, is if we think about the programs that we offer at LeaderShape, and specifically, for those of you that don't know, we have an institute that's a 4 or 6 day immersion experience in the woods through a curriculum where folks, they cry at the end, that kind of thing. But what's interesting is that I believe that there are 2 types of students who attend the Institute. One is someone who's in a leadership role, who's always felt that they were a leader all the time and just are coming in to just prove that they are going to be student body president or whatever. And then you've got a student that does not in any way feel that they are a quote unquote leader. And by the end of the experience, the student who believes that they will be a student body president and feel that they have learned all they can about leadership end with, oh my God, I have so much more to learn. I am truly not as good as I'm not there yet. And the students who enter thinking they aren't typically end with, oh my God, I do have this in me. And so I do believe that I really think about that. I didn't have the term reluctant leadership in my vocabulary early on in my career working with students in leadership, but I know that that's what happens. And I just want to make sure that we are thinking about that as leadership educators, is that we need to be looking for those folks who don't see themselves for so many reasons, as you've just shared.
Chris, I see your question in here about imposter syndrome. It's a really good question. And at least from my experience, I think they are like, it's part of the Venn diagram of reluctant leadership for sure. I think in my minoritized identities, I certainly felt that imposter syndrome and that reluctance. And that's why I tried to kind of weave that in there, because I don't think we can discount the level of how our identities can kind of play a part into this conversation, especially in the United States. I think where they don't overlap for me is, well, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I feel like they play a part into the reluctance, but they're not the entire picture of the reluctance, because we don't have a lot of examples of, we don't tell a lot of stories about the leadership process and working through the imposter syndrome, or being placed in places where the imposter syndrome happens. But it's a good question. I feel like reluctant leadership is like multifaceted, but I feel like that's just one of the places where I feel reluctant, but particularly in my identities. I think in the other places that I reside, leadership doesn't feel like an approachable thing, which I don't know how that plays into imposter syndrome, but it just doesn't feel like that's where I'm heading most of the time. So I don't know I don't know. It's a good question. Of course you asked a good question, because you're awesome.
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks for being here. Hi.
Well, and I also think too about, when you talked about autonomy, I love your comment around the fact that I know working with you as convention chair, the thing that I was most concerned about was, does he need me right now? And I had to balance, do I check in or do we set up things? And then I realized in my relationship with you that, oh, you will tell me when you need me. And so, and that was the thing for me. I know that I think about that sometimes when I work with students. It's like, and I need to always remember with reluctant leaders, they got this. And that's what I think about with the students I've worked with who have moved into leadership roles, who were reluctant leaders. They were the ones I didn't worry about at all, because I knew things were going to get done. But still, I had this feeling, because I'd worked with so many other folks who pretend to have the skills to do things and then, you know, screw it all up. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I never really thought about that in terms of my interaction with folks who may be reluctant leaders.
Yeah. Abby, I agree. I think the connection, I'll just read this for folks who didn't see it. The connection between reluctant leader and imposter syndrome is around how a particular person doesn't use leader to identify themselves, even if others do. Certainly, right? Like that moniker, I think, is not something, even to this day, is not something that I take lightly or that I really consider in my, you know, in my description of myself. I'd rather describe it in context with community than it is about like being in leadership and saying like I am a leader. Usually not what I talk about.
Well, and I think too, I mean, I think some folks on this Zoom will know the work of John Dugan around critical perspectives of leadership. And what he talks about is we have a US-centered view of leadership, and the way in which we must sort of unpack our leadership programs to say, how can we infuse indigenous ways of knowing? How can we infuse other identities, ways of looking at leadership from around the world and in other cultures? And that's the piece that's the next sort of battle that we have, is to really look at that. And I do believe that reluctant leaders will then see leadership differently if we continue to sort of unpack that and have better conversations about that.
Sure. There have been lots of times when I say like, gosh, if we just took a communal approach to this, we would just do it so much better if people, you know, if people really embrace that and embrace the people who are like not sticking out all the time. So
yeah. Yep, totally.
Description of anti-nurturing environments. Yes. Western US contexts are socialized to work against respecting emergent process of the world and each other. We learn to be quiet, polite, indirect, submissive, and not reputable, for sure. And especially as folks of color, that's our space, right? Which is why I think, in so many ways, this is why I think the community is so important, is because we're told all the time that that's not you, that's not you, that's not you. But in our communities, right, suddenly we're told, actually, that is you. You are this person that we look to for guidance. I was called a sage once. Someone called me a sage, and I was like, I don't understand, like, but by a person that I really, they're like, but you're a sage. Like, people come to you for information and knowledge and perspective. And I was like, not me. I think you meant someone else.
I thought you meant a spice. Okay, all right, okay.
No. Like, sure, spice. Yes. No, like a sage, like a wise person. That's why people seek me out. And I'm like,
yeah. Cool. Well, you are a wise person, and we are moving toward time. So I do want to thank you, Bernie, so much for joining us. And yes, this presentation is recorded, so feel free to share it with others. You'll get the link in a few days. I would be remiss if I did not talk about the fact that we do have some amazing virtual and soon to be back in person programs for LeaderShape. And so reach out to us if you would love to have conversations with us about the wonderful things that we continue to do, I believe, for students and professionals on our college campuses. And you know, we are a not-for-profit, so it's important for you to know that if you can and have the ability, please consider donating and supporting us in the work that we do. We'll be back tomorrow with a final conversation. And so make sure that you join us if you can. And thanks once again, Bernie. You are a tremendous just beacon in our profession. And you continue to impact so many folks. And I know that being your friend and being a colleague has been one of the joys of my life. So thank you. And thank you for all that you do for LeaderShape. Thanks, everyone.